today. And maybe it's because of somebody's life they touched. Maybe it's because of somebody that they smiled or hugged or loved on that could have made a different decision in their life. But we're grateful. And so, you guys, the floor is yours. Wherever you want to start, share. Because I know I'm just excited to hear and the process and what got you to now. And go right ahead. Go right ahead.
Well, I will begin because I am taking a mother's privilege. I am the mom, so I get to go first.
Amen.
This young man has been the joy of my life since he was born. I had so many plans for him. I had so many goals for him, none of which included a 5-year detour into the penitentiary. But my plans do not trump God's plans. Okay? My plans didn't take precedent over what God had planned for him. God has a plan and a purpose for everyone's life. And I have learned that on the journey. In 1991, some of you who may have been residents here in the city of Columbus at that time, Oletha was a freshman up at Ohio State University. He had just walked on to the OSU wrestling team, and anybody that knows anything about OSU or wrestling, you know that just anybody can't just walk onto that team. The evening of the incident occurred. We had been up to Ohio State University, his younger brother and I, to meet Coach Hellickson and to meet the team and just, scope out the environment that he was going to be wrestling in. And that evening, my youngest son, he begged me. Oletha said he was going to meet some of his friends after the wrestling and hang out at the campus bars where the kids hang out up on High Street. And my youngest son, he was like, "Mom, I want to stay. We can stay. I can stay in his apartment." And I'm like, "No, we got things to do. You need to come home." And it was only because of God's grace that I didn't give in to his whining and begging to stay. Because a few hours later, we got a call in the middle of the night from Oletha, and all I could hear was, "Mom, they beat me up." 2:30 in the morning. I'm hearing this, what? I'm waking up out of a dead sleep. And it just so happened that earlier that day we had the carpet cleaners out, and they had left the water tap outside, and it had flooded the basement, and it had caused the ceiling tiles in the basement to drop to the floor. And so his brother was sleeping upstairs in my room on the floor beside my bed. Well, we jumped up, we drove downtown. He told me he was in front of the courts building down on High Street. I drive up, I see him standing there on the sidewalk. He's got a hooded parka pulled up over his head, and he's just standing there, a lone figure, 3 o'clock in the morning on High Street in the dark. When we pull up to where he's standing, to where we can see him, all I could hear was a piercing scream from his brother, who had seen his face. I'm on the driver's side, he's on the passenger side. I couldn't see him, and his face was battered, and where they had beaten him with one of those metal flashlights. His teeth were knocked out. The fur around the hood of the parka was matted with blood. Fragments of teeth in his mouth. his head gashed, his lips so bloody and swollen that he could just barely speak.
My God.
From there, it was all a blur. Police and trials, and it was a mother's nightmare. It was a mother's nightmare. I became so disheartened, so disillusioned. This was not what I had planned for my son. This is not what I thought God had given me this young man for. Here's a guy who in high school was who's who in high school athletics and sports and academics and most likely to succeed and all the things that you wish for your child. And now here he is, just a beaten, bloody mass. It was indescribable. I don't even know now, except for the grace of God, how I even managed to live through it. Those were the most horrible, disheartening days of my life. But now, as I look back over these 30, 40 years, I can see the hand of God clearly orchestrating this whole situation. God is able to do exceedingly and abundantly above anything you can even begin to ask or think. You couldn't even have come up with a scenario that would have resulted in what we see sitting here today. Or how it would have one young man who got lost was able to help me on my journey, to set me straight, to get me to the place where I needed to be before God. And that is in a place of obedience and trust, regardless of what it looks like. We as believers need to be able to trust that God is in control at all times and in every situation. We parents, we have goals for our children. We think we want our children to be this or to be that. But we have to remember that these children do not belong to us.
That's right.
These children are on loan to us.
That's right.
We are the stewards of these children.
Right.
And it behooves us as parents and as grandparents to live a life that is exemplary so that they know the right way to go. They're not going to always stay on the path that we have laid out for them.
Right.
But we have a responsibility to lead them, show them, train them up in the way that they should go, so that when they get old, that they won't depart from it.
That's right.
Can I ask you something? Can we give her a hand for sharing that? In that moment, when you saw your son like that, as a believing mother, how great was the impact? Did your faith waver? Did you say, God, what in the world? How did you get through that moment as a mother? How did you get through that moment?
I was brought up in the church, and everybody in this family, they know we were brought up in the church. But we were brought up not really, I was brought up not really understanding. I didn't have a heart knowledge of who God was. I had a head knowledge. I knew who God was. I knew He raised Lazarus from the dead. I knew He was able to do all these different miracles. But I didn't really know Him in the way that afterwards I came to know Him. So, of course, the doubt, the fear set in, Satan immediately began to attack me and tell me, see, you wasn't a good parent. You didn't do the right thing. Look, you wouldn't be out here like this if you had been a good parent. And that's what happens when we when we don't have that trust and that relationship with Christ. And I didn't have the type of relationship then that I do now, because it took this situation, this crisis, to bring me to where I am right now.
And so I would like to just add to that, because I think, my experience with that event and everything that led up to it was really rooted in something that my mother just spoke to, about having a head knowledge of who God is, but not that personal relationship, right? And for me, that took the form of identity. I didn't know who I was. My identity coming up in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, there were so many conflicting messages of what a black man was. I came up through Shaft and Superfly and all of that kind of stuff, and
New
out
Jack
of that,
City.
that's right, and right, I was just about to go there, and then out of that, we get NWA and the New Jack City and the gangster rap and all of that, all against the backdrop of you are nobody but a slave. Your ancestors were savages that we essentially rescued from the jungle, brought you here, and gave you Christianity. There was no, now, and I say that intentionally because I had the privilege of, 3 years ago, I was in D.C. lobbying on Capitol Hill with Mentor, which is a national and international mentoring group. And so while we were there, the Bible Museum was being featured in downtown DC, or in DC. So we had an opportunity to visit the Bible Museum, and featured there